The sun hung low over the Montana horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. The crisp morning air carried the scent of pine and earth. As Emily Carter approached the old shooting range on the outskirts of town, it was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, where reputations were made, and where skill with a rifle wasn't just admired, it was expected. Emily's boots crunched over the gravel as she carried her father's old Winchester, a rifle that had seen more winters than she had, yet remained perfectly balanced and meticulously cared for. The regulars at the range were already there, gathered in small groups, chatting and laughing over coffee and cigarettes. Most were men, ranging from grizzled veterans to younger hunters, who bragged about their latest trophies. Heads turned as Emily stepped into the clearing. She was slender, but stood with an unshakable confidence, her dark hair tied neatly into a braid, her eyes calm but alert. She could feel the stares of judgment piercing her back, some curious, some skeptical, and a few openly mocking. Jake Thompson noticed her first. A broad-shouldered man in his early 30s, Jake had a reputation that preceded him. He was a local shooting champion, a former Marine with a sharp tongue and sharper aim. Jake had spent countless mornings at this range, honing his skills, surrounded by men who admired his prowess and feared his competitive edge. He smirked when he saw Emily, leaning against the wooden railing with a rifle she clearly handled with care. "Well, well," he called out, his voice carrying across the range. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little lady sharpshooter. Hope she brought a hairbrush, not a rifle." The laugh that followed came from his friends, and several other men glanced over with amused expressions. Emily paused for a moment, feeling the weight of their ridicule. Then, with a subtle smile, she adjusted the strap of her rifle over her shoulder and walked toward the firing line. There was no hesitation in her steps, no faltering, only a quiet determination that made some of the men shift uncomfortably. Emily's presence immediately altered the dynamic. Conversations halted mid-sentence, eyes followed her every move, and a few whispered bets began. Would she fail spectacularly? Could she even manage to load the old Winchester correctly? She had heard the questions, the murmurs, the doubting laughter, and she didn't deny it, nor did she explain herself. This wasn't about proving anything to them. This was about the challenge she had set for herself, about showing that skill, patience, and focus could surpass mere bravado. Her father had always been her guide, her mentor, and her inspiration. He had taught her to respect the rifle, to treat it as an extension of oneself rather than a tool of destruction. He had drilled her for hours in the backyard of their small farmhouse, using tin cans and paper targets, whispering encouragement as she learned the subtleties of aim, stance, and breathing. Emily had grown up with the scent of gunpowder in the air and the soft murmur of her father's voice reminding her, "Control your breath, control your aim." Precision beats speed every time. Now, standing at the firing line, all those lessons came rushing back. The old Winchester felt familiar in her hands, the cold steel of the barrel grounding her, the smooth wooden stock fitting perfectly against her shoulder. She took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs and steady her pulse. Around her, the other shooters were positioning themselves, adjusting sights and flexing their muscles. Jake swaggered forward, rifle in hand, clearly expecting a show. "You know, it's cute that you think you can compete," he said, loud enough for the group to hear. "But don't be embarrassed if you can't even hit the target at 10 yards. Laughter erupted from his friends. Emily didn't flinch. She simply nodded politely, setting her rifle down and beginning to check her equipment with meticulous care. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, almost ritualistic. Every click of the mechanism, every adjustment to the sights seemed to say, "I belong here as much as anyone." As the crowd settled into the benches and folding chairs surrounding the range, Emily allowed herself a brief glance around. Faces lined with curiosity, skepticism, and amusement studied her intently. The air was thick with anticipation. For some, this was entertainment. For Emily, it was her proving ground. She knew this would be more than just hitting targets. It was about composure, control, and proving that the mockery of others could never shake her confidence. Jake, growing impatient, stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he observed her. "You sure you know what you're doing?" he asked, tone dripping with mockery. Emily looked up from adjusting the sight and replied evenly, "I think you'll find out soon enough." There was no anger in her voice, only quiet certainty. That certainty was more intimidating than any glare, more commanding than any insult. She wasn't here to fight him with words. She was here to win with action. She raised the rifle, settled her stance, and felt the familiar hum of concentration. The world around her narrowed to the target in the distance, the cool air on her face, and the weight of the rifle against her shoulder. Every whisper, every chuckle faded into insignificance. Emily's mind focused on what mattered: her aim, her breath, the rhythm of her hands, and the memory of her father's patient guidance. Each movement was a reflection of years of practice, discipline, and devotion. As the first shot rang out, Emily felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She had entered this world as an outsider, a newcomer, doubted and underestimated by everyone present. But now, at the edge of the firing line, she was ready. The old Winchester in her hands was more than a weapon. It was a bridge to her father, a symbol of her dedication, and a challenge to those who doubted her. Today, she would show them the power of focus, precision, and unwavering determination. For the men who mocked her, Emily was about to become a lesson they wouldn't forget. For herself, she was about to honor a legacy. And as she took a final steadying breath and aligned her sights, she knew that the day was hers to define, not by anyone else's expectations, but by her own skill, patience, and courage. The range fell silent, every eye on her, every heartbeat synchronized with hers, waiting for the moment that would announce the arrival of the unlikely newcomer who refused to be underestimated. The morning sun had climbed higher over the Montana range, glinting off the metal of rifles and the worn wooden planks of the benches. Emily Carter stood at the firing line, her Winchester cradled gently in her hands. Around her, the chatter of the crowd buzzed, punctuated by the sharp, metallic click of rifle mechanisms and the occasional boisterous laugh. The tension in the air was almost tangible, part anticipation, part amusement, part skepticism. Emily had long since learned to tune out the background noise, focusing only on what mattered: the target, her breath, her aim. Jake Thompson was pacing near the edge of the line, smirking as he surveyed her. He had been trying to provoke a reaction since she arrived, his voice cutting through the morning air like a knife. "Need me to show you how to hold that thing properly?" he called. A wave of laughter followed from his friends and several onlookers, most of them shaking their heads at the audacity of a newcomer, challenging a seasoned competitor. But Emily did not flinch. She did not respond immediately. She merely adjusted her stance, sliding her feet slightly and aligning her shoulders in a perfect firing posture, almost as if the air itself had taught her. The first time Jake aimed his own rifle at the nearby target, he fired a clean shot. He smirked, turning toward Emily. "See? That's how a real shooter does it." The crowd laughed, some clapping, others whispering bets about how long it would take for her to embarrass herself. Emily crouched slightly, resting her finger lightly on the trigger guard, and exhaled slowly. Every movement was deliberate, almost meditative, as she recalled her father's lessons from years ago. He had always said, "It's never about how strong you are, Emily. It's about how steady you can be when the world tries to rattle you." Her first shot rang out, the crisp report echoing across the valley. The small target at 20 yards was shattered almost perfectly in the center. A ripple of astonishment moved through the crowd. Laughter faltered, replaced by murmurs. Jake raised an eyebrow, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his confident expression. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, but Emily had already moved to her next target. Each shot that followed was as precise as the first, her breathing steady, her hands unshaking, her mind entirely in control. Jake tried again, his pride driving him to distraction. He fired at the same target, but under the pressure of the growing audience and the unshakable focus of the newcomer, he missed slightly, clipping the edge instead of hitting dead center. The men around him murmured. Emily, however, continued with quiet determination. She had been mocked, doubted, and underestimated, but none of it touched her resolve. Every sound around her, the chuckles, the jabs, even the wind brushing across the range, seemed to fade into silence when she raised her rifle. The mockery intensified as the contest continued. Jake leaned closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "Seriously, you should just give it up now. You're going to make a fool of yourself." Emily glanced at him, her face calm, almost serene. "We'll see who makes a fool of whom," she replied softly. Her words were not meant to provoke a fight. They were meant to signal control. She had learned early that anger and arrogance never won battles. Patience, skill, and focus always did. Her mind wandered briefly, recalling the long afternoons in her father's backyard. He had been patient, meticulous, teaching her how to line up shots, how to account for wind and distance, how to breathe so that every muscle worked in harmony. Every missed shot had been a lesson, every perfect shot a quiet victory. Now, years later, those lessons were not just memories. They were her foundation, her shield against ridicule, her weapon against doubt. She drew upon them silently as she lined up her next series of shots, each one striking closer and closer to perfection. The crowd began to notice the change in the atmosphere. Where once there had been laughter and amusement, there was now curiosity, awe, and even a bit of fear. Emily was no longer the girl with the old rifle. She was a contender, precise and unflinching, moving through the targets with a grace that belied her quiet demeanor. The men who had mocked her now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to cheer, to whisper, or to keep silent. Every eye followed her movements, every breath synchronized with the rhythm of her aim. Jake's confidence began to crack as he watched her fire again and again, hitting the bullseye with each shot. He clenched his jaw, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to him. "Beginner's luck," he muttered again, though this time it carried a note of desperation. Emily's calm, unwavering focus was like a mirror, reflecting back every ounce of his arrogance and shaking it. The mockery he had relied upon now seemed petty, almost childish. The crowd sensed the shift. What had begun as entertainment was evolving into a quiet spectacle of skill, respect, and silent tension. Emily paused for a moment, setting the rifle carefully on her shoulder and closing her eyes. She exhaled slowly, centering herself, recalling the countless hours of practice, the whispers of her father's encouragement echoing in her mind. "Focus, Emily. Let the rifle be part of you, not a tool to impress others." Her next shot was deliberate, a slow squeeze of the trigger that sent the bullet perfectly into the center of the target. A gasp rippled through the spectators. Jake's smirk faltered, replaced by a frown he couldn't quite hide. The range was quiet now, the only sounds being the faint rustling of trees in the morning breeze and the steady clicks of rifles being readied. Emily's composure was unshakable. Each shot she fired, each bullseye she struck, was a quiet statement, a statement that mockery could not break skill, that arrogance could not match focus, that judgment could not surpass dedication. She had entered this world as an outsider, doubted and underestimated, and now, quietly but unmistakably, she was making her presence felt. By midday, the mockery had turned to astonishment. Jake, still unwilling to admit defeat, fired once more, his shot slightly off-center, an unmistakable indication of his faltering confidence. The crowd murmured, whispers of admiration replacing earlier laughter. Emily adjusted her stance for the next round, serene, calm, unwavering. Her father's teachings, her hours of practice, and her quiet resolve had carried her past the noise, past the jokes, past the doubt. She was no longer just a newcomer, she was a force, precise, measured, and impossible to ignore. As the sun reached its peak, Emily fired another series of shots. Each one was cleaner than the last, a perfect demonstration of focus under pressure. Jake watched, realizing for the first time that his mockery had not been a challenge, but a misjudgment. The crowd leaned forward, some whispering in disbelief, others clapping quietly, unsure whether to celebrate or simply absorb the unfolding spectacle. Emily's quiet determination had transformed the atmosphere of the range. What had begun as entertainment had become a lesson in skill, patience, and silent triumph. When Emily finally set her rifle down, she did not look for applause. She did not boast, did not grin, did not gloat. She simply exhaled, the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had held her ground and honored her father's teachings. Jake, meanwhile, stood in stunned silence, the weight of his arrogance now painfully evident. The mockery had failed. The outsider had become the focus, the skilled hand amidst the crowd of doubters. And for Emily, the challenge had only just begun. That evening, the range was quiet, bathed in the fading amber glow of the Montana sun. Emily Carter sat alone on the worn wooden bench near the far edge of the field, the crowd having dispersed after the day's practice. The rhythmic chirping of crickets and the distant rustle of pine needles filled the silence. She held her father's Winchester in her lap, running her fingers along its smooth, polished wood. Every groove, every scratch, every carved initial told stories of lessons, patience, and love. To the casual observer, it was just a rifle. To Emily, it was a tangible connection to the man who had shaped her life. Her father, Robert Carter, had been a quiet, patient man with a deep love for nature and discipline. Before his death, he had spent countless afternoons teaching Emily in the backyard of their small Montana home. He had shown her how to handle a firearm safely, how to respect it as a tool, and how to master her own nerves. She remembered the way he would kneel beside her, adjusting her grip on the rifle, guiding her shoulders, and whispering, "Focus on your target. Let everything else fade away." Emily smiled faintly at the memory, the echo of his voice still clear in her mind. He had been more than a teacher. He had been her mentor, her guide, and her safe harbor in a world that often underestimated her. She remembered the first time he had handed her the Winchester. She had been just 13, a small girl with shaky hands and racing thoughts. "This rifle," he had said, "is more than metal and wood. It's an extension of yourself. Treat it with respect, and it will do wonders. Treat it with doubt, and it will betray you." That day, she had fired her first shot, missing the target entirely. But Robert had not scolded her. He had only smiled, kneeling beside her and saying, "Every miss is a lesson, Emily. Learn, adjust, and try again." The lessons continued over the years, not just about shooting, but about life. He had taught her discipline, patience, and humility. "Strength isn't about muscle," he would say. "It's about steadiness. It's about focus when the world tries to shake you." Emily had taken these words to heart, practicing in the early mornings and late evenings, often alone. She remembered nights when the stars hung low in the sky, and the only sound was the soft crack of her bullets hitting tin cans. Her father would sit nearby, silently observing, letting her learn from her own mistakes, stepping in only when guidance was truly needed. Now, holding the rifle in her lap, Emily felt the weight of his presence in every detail. The cool metal against her fingertips, the familiar smell of gunpowder lingering faintly on the wood, the slight creak of the stock as she adjusted her grip, All of it reminded her of him. She closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment to imagine him sitting beside her, his calm, reassuring smile encouraging her to continue. Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she allowed herself to draw strength from the memory, knowing that her father's teachings were guiding her even in his absence. Her thoughts drifted back to the mornings of preparation, where every aspect of shooting had been a lesson in mindfulness. Her father had taught her how to steady her breathing, how to align her body with the target, and how to anticipate the slight movement of the rifle with each heartbeat. "Your body and mind must work as one," he had said. "The rifle is just an extension of your focus." Emily remembered the countless repetitions, the careful adjustments, the patience demanded by every missed shot. Those lessons were now etched into her very being, shaping not just her aim, but her character. Emily's reflections were interrupted by the distant sound of footsteps on gravel. She looked up to see Jake Thompson approaching, a hesitant expression on his face. Today, he had been mocking, competitive, and confident to the point of arrogance. But as he drew closer, Emily noticed something different, a flicker of respect, maybe even curiosity, in his eyes. He stopped a few feet away, resting his hands on his knees, and regarded her silently for a moment. Emily met his gaze without words, letting the silence speak for her focus, her resolve, and the quiet strength that came from years of preparation. "You really do know what you're doing," Jake admitted finally, his voice low, almost reluctant. There was no mockery, no taunt, just acknowledgement. Emily tilted her head slightly, a faint smile crossing her lips. "It's not about knowing," she said softly. "It's about practice, patience, and remembering what matters." She gestured to the rifle in her lap. "This isn't just a weapon. It's a connection. Every shot is a choice, every target a lesson." Jake nodded slowly, absorbing her words. For the first time, he seemed to understand that her skill was not a fluke, not a matter of luck, and certainly not something to ridicule. Emily's calm, measured demeanor, shaped by years of patient guidance and personal determination, had transformed the perception of everyone around her. Where once there had been laughter, there was now quiet contemplation. Where there had been doubt, there was acknowledgement of talent and resolve. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the range, Emily's mind returned to the lessons she had learned from her father. She remembered his emphasis on respect, precision, and humility. He had never taught her to seek validation from others. He had taught her to master herself first. And in that mastery, she had found power far greater than ridicule or doubt could ever diminish. Her aim was precise because her heart and mind were steady. Her confidence was rooted not in arrogance, but in preparation and purpose. She thought about the days ahead, the upcoming challenge, the eyes that would be on her, and the pressures of expectation. She no longer feared the mockery or the judgment of others. Instead, she welcomed it as a test of her focus, a way to measure not just her skill, but her resilience. Every shot she would take in the challenge would be more than an attempt to hit a target. It would be a tribute to her father, to the lessons he had instilled, and to the strength she had cultivated through years of dedication. Emily carefully placed the rifle on the bench beside her and looked out over the range. The targets in the distance seemed smaller, less intimidating, as if they recognized the skill that had been forged in quiet determination and patience. She allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply, feeling the cool Montana air fill her lungs and steady her heartbeat. The memory of her father, the echo of his guidance, and the foundation of her own practice had converged into a singular focus. She would not be underestimated. She would not falter. And she would honor the legacy he had entrusted to her with every shot she fired. As darkness slowly fell, and the first stars began to appear in the clear sky, Emily stood, lifting the Winchester with reverence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new eyes watching, and new tests of skill and patience. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the quiet strength that came from memory, from preparation, and from the unwavering love of a father who had shaped her into the markswoman she was becoming. She whispered softly, "I'll make you proud, Dad." And for the first time in hours, she felt a serene confidence that went beyond skill and unshakable belief in herself. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth as the town gathered for the annual Frontier Rifle Challenge. Stalls lined the edges of the old shooting range, selling coffee, homemade pastries, and memorabilia from past competitions. Children darted between benches, their laughter mingling with the hum of excitement. The event had always drawn seasoned marksmen and hunters from across the county. But this year, a different energy lingered in the air, a mix of curiosity and skepticism, all revolving around the young woman with the old Winchester, Emily Carter. Emily arrived early, just as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon. She carried her rifle with quiet reverence, her movements deliberate, her posture calm. The crowd had already begun to assemble, some whispering rumors, others casting skeptical glances. Most had seen her at the range before, but none could predict what she was capable of. Emily walked to the firing line, her eyes scanning the targets that stretched across the open field. Each one was placed at varying distances, increasing in difficulty, testing precision, control, and nerves. She exhaled slowly, letting the familiar weight of the Winchester ground her. Jake Thompson was already there, leaning against the side of the firing line with his arms crossed, a cocky grin plastered across his face. "You ready to make a fool of yourself in front of the whole town?" he called, loud enough for spectators to hear. Laughter erupted around him, but Emily merely tilted her head slightly and replied, "We'll see." Her calm, measured tone sent a ripple of uncertainty through the crowd. For once, Jake's confidence faltered, though he masked it with a smirk. He wasn't accustomed to opponents who didn't react to his taunts. The announcer's voice boomed across the field, calling the competitors to their positions. The first round would test accuracy at 20 yards, with each participant taking 10 shots. Emily positioned herself carefully, adjusting her stance and checking her rifle. She could feel the eyes of the crowd piercing her, some full of doubt, others tinged with curiosity. She let it wash over her without distraction. She had faced worse mockery, skepticism, and doubt, and it had only sharpened her focus. As the first competitors fired, Emily watched carefully, noting the recoil, the alignment, and the precision. Most of the men were confident, firing quickly, sometimes recklessly. A few of them scored perfectly, others missed by inches, their shots disrupted by overconfidence or nerves. When her turn arrived, the range fell into a hush. All chatter ceased as she raised the Winchester to her shoulder, her movements fluid and deliberate. The first shot rang out dead center. Gasps echoed from the crowd. She exhaled, recentered, and fired again, another perfect hit. By the third shot, the whispers among spectators had grown louder. "Did you see that?" One man murmured. She's incredible." Jake, standing nearby, felt a flicker of unease. His own shots had been steady, but Emily's precision surpassed his expectations. With each bullet that struck the center of the target, he could feel his smug confidence slipping away, replaced by something unfamiliar, respect tinged with apprehension. He had mocked her repeatedly, but now, watching her perform flawlessly, he realized she was not to be underestimated. Emily's focus never wavered. The targets became a rhythm. Breathe, aim, fire, adjust. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Focus on the target, Emily. Let everything else fade away." The noise, the laughter, the doubts, even Jake's lingering smirks disappeared. All that mattered was the rifle, the target, and her own steady hand. She moved through the series with quiet determination, each shot a testament to years of preparation and dedication. The middle round increased in difficulty. Targets were spaced further apart, requiring longer sight adjustments and subtle consideration of wind. Many of the competitors struggled. Shots grazed the edges, missed entirely, or split the targets unevenly. Emily, however, adjusted calmly, using every lesson her father had taught her. She accounted for the slight breeze, steadied her hands, and fired again. Bullseye. Then another. Each shot struck with deadly accuracy. And the audience began to lean forward, their skepticism transforming into awe. Jake's composure faltered further. His own shots were no longer as perfect, the pressure mounting as the crowd's attention shifted toward Emily. The young woman who had once been the subject of mockery was now commanding respect. For the first time, he realized that his skill, while impressive, was no match for Emily's steady precision and calm under pressure. Every missed target of his felt heavier as her flawless streak continued. Each hit a reminder that talent alone was not enough. Focus, preparation, and resilience were equally essential. By the final round, Emily was in complete control. The targets were the furthest of the day, requiring absolute precision. Her heart remained steady, her breathing rhythmic, her hands unshakable. The weight of the Winchester felt natural, almost comforting. Around her, spectators held their breath with every shot. Jake stood silently, watching as Emily aligned, exhaled, and fired. The bullet struck the center. She adjusted, fired again. Another bullseye. By the 10th and final shot, she split the center of the target perfectly, earning a flawless score. The field was silent for a moment, then erupted into applause. Whispers of disbelief and admiration swept through the crowd. Emily lowered her rifle, calm but proud. She had proven herself not through words, but through action. Jake approached her, finally shedding his bravado. There was no mockery in his expression, only a hint of humility and respect. "I didn't think you had it in you," he admitted, voice quiet, almost apologetic. Emily offered a small smile. "It's not about what others expect," she replied. "It's about focus, patience, and doing your best." The judges confirmed the results. Emily had won, her accuracy unmatched throughout every round. The crowd erupted again, cheering not only for her skill, but for her composure, her courage, and her triumph over doubt and mockery. She lifted the Winchester slightly, a silent tribute to her father. He had been with her in every lesson, every shot, every quiet practice in the backyard. Today, his teachings had been vindicated in the most spectacular way. Even after the official announcements, spectators lingered, seeking a glimpse of the young woman who had dominated the range with quiet precision. Children pointed and whispered. Adults clapped and congratulated her. And Jake stood nearby, reflecting on his own arrogance and the lesson he had learned. Emily had arrived as an outsider, doubted and underestimated, and she had emerged as a champion. Her victory was not only in the points scored, but in the respect she had earned, the prejudices she had overcome, and the proof that skill and preparation could silence even the harshest critics. As the sun reached its zenith and the shadows shifted across the field, Emily carefully cleaned her rifle, her movements deliberate and respectful. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to absorb the applause and admiration, and to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. It had been years of practice, years of patience, and years of carrying the lessons of a father she still deeply missed. Today, every shot fired was a tribute to him, every perfect hit a fulfillment of the lessons he had instilled in her. And as she finally stepped away from the firing line, Emily felt a quiet satisfaction, unlike any other. She had faced mockery, skepticism, and doubt, and she had not only survived, she had triumphed. Her skill, her composure, and her unwavering dedication had turned the tides of opinion, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed her performance. The day of the challenge had become a defining moment, one that would be remembered long after the targets were taken down and the crowd had dispersed. Emily Carter had arrived as the unlikely newcomer, but she would leave as a symbol of focus, resilience, and quiet power. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Montana shooting range, turning the field into a landscape of light and contrast. The air was still, save for the soft rustling of pine needles and the distant calls of birds. Emily Carter stood at the firing line, her Winchester cradled against her shoulder, her posture poised and unwavering. The crowd had grown larger, more attentive, and increasingly silent, sensing the extraordinary performance they were witnessing. Emily's calm, measured demeanor set her apart. She was not rushing. She was deliberate, precise, and unshakable, a master of her craft. Jake Thompson had just finished his round, brow furrowed, jaw tight. He had been confident, sure of his skill, and now he could not hide the tension creeping into his movements. He watched Emily with a mixture of fascination and unease. Every shot she fired struck the center of the target with near-perfect consistency. The crowd's murmurs had shifted from curiosity to astonishment. Emily's presence, once a source of amusement, had become the focal point of the competition. The energy around her was electric, charged with disbelief and admiration. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly as she aligned her rifle with the next target, a steel plate at an increased distance, swaying slightly in the mild afternoon breeze. She exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar weight of the Winchester against her shoulder, grounding her. Her father's lessons echoed in her mind. Focus on the target. Let nothing distract you. Precision is born from patience. She had internalized those words over years of practice, and now they guided every movement, every breath, every shot. The first bullet rang out with crisp authority, striking dead center. The crowd's gasps were audible. She adjusted slightly for wind, her movements fluid and precise, and fired again. Another bullseye. Each shot in succession demonstrated her mastery, unwavering aim, controlled breathing, and flawless execution. Even the seasoned marksman watching could not help but nod in silent respect. Emily's skill was undeniable. Her focus, almost supernatural in its steadiness. She seemed to operate in a zone where nothing external could touch her concentration. Jake's attempts to reclaim dominance were faltering. He fired with all his experience and training, yet the pressure of the growing crowd, coupled with Emily's relentless precision, disrupted his rhythm. A few of his shots grazed the edge of targets, and the confidence that had carried him through previous contests wavered. He had underestimated her, not just her skill, but her composure under scrutiny. Every hit Emily scored was a reminder that talent alone was not enough. Focus, discipline, and resilience were equally, if not more, critical. The targets increased in difficulty, placed at varied distances and angles. Some swayed gently, others partially obscured by obstacles, testing not just accuracy, but judgment and adaptability. Emily adjusted effortlessly, calculating distance and wind, holding her breath, and squeezing the trigger with perfect timing. Each shot was deliberate, each impact precise. The audience leaned forward collectively, a silent tension in the air. Emily had transformed from a novelty into the star of the event. Her presence commanded attention, respect, and awe. A particularly challenging target appeared, a small steel plate, positioned at an extended distance with a light gust of wind crossing its path. Many competitors hesitated, struggling to compensate for the unpredictable movement. Emily, however, adjusted her stance subtly, accounted for the wind, and fired. The bullet struck true, sending a resonant ring across the field. A collective murmur rose from the crowd. Jake, standing nearby, felt his stomach tighten. The woman he had mocked was now outperforming him in every measurable way. He could not hide the realization that Emily's skill was extraordinary. Emily continued through the final set of targets, each shot executed with unwavering precision. Her focus was absolute, her body steady, her mind clear. It was not speed that defined her success, but the power of measured action and the quiet mastery of her craft. Each bullseye was a testament to years of preparation, discipline, and an unbroken bond with the lessons of her father. The Winchester, once an ordinary rifle in the eyes of onlookers, had become a conduit for her skill, determination, and inner strength. As she fired her 10th and final shot, splitting the center of the target with uncanny accuracy, the crowd erupted. Applause, cheers, and astonished exclamations filled the air. Emily lowered her rifle, her expression calm, yet resolute. She did not smile, did not boast, did not revel in the moment. Instead, she allowed herself a quiet satisfaction, the deep, unspoken acknowledgement that her preparation, patience, and dedication had borne fruit. She had proven not only to the crowd, but to herself, that mastery came from more than talent alone. Jake approached her slowly, a mixture of respect and disbelief in his eyes. For the first time, he spoke without sarcasm or condescension. You really are something," he admitted, voice low. Emily regarded him steadily, her calm composure unwavering. "It's not about being something," she said softly. "It's about preparation, patience, and focus. Anyone can learn to hit a target if they're willing to put in the work." Jake nodded, reflecting on his arrogance and the lesson unfolding before him. He had thought mockery and confidence were enough to dominate, but he now understood the power of discipline and quiet mastery. The judges tallied the scores. Emily had achieved a flawless performance, every shot hitting the center, every target accounted for, no mistakes. The crowd cheered, some shouting her name, others clapping silently, still stunned by the display of precision. Emily accepted their admiration quietly, lifting her Winchester in a subtle nod to her father, the man who had taught her that focus and discipline outweighed bravado and mockery. This was not just a victory in the contest, it was a triumph of preparation, legacy, and unwavering determination. Even after the event, spectators lingered, asking questions, seeking advice, and reflecting on what they had witnessed. Emily, however, remained humble, offering guidance and sharing the principles of focus and patience, rather than boasting of her victory. Her triumph had become a lesson for everyone present. Skill earned through dedication commands respect, while arrogance built on shallow confidence crumbles under pressure. She had entered as an outsider, doubted and mocked, and she had emerged as a beacon of composure, precision, and quiet power. As the sun dipped lower in the Montana sky, Emily packed her rifle carefully, cleaning it with the same meticulous care she had always maintained. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, a comforting reminder of why she had pursued mastery in the first place. It's never the gun, Emily, it's the will behind it. That will, honed through years of training and shaped by the lessons of her father, had carried her through mockery, doubt, and pressure to a performance that none could forget. Emily stepped away from the firing line, her head held high, her eyes reflecting both satisfaction and determination. She had proven herself not only to the crowd and to Jake, but to herself. Her precision and power were unmatched that day, and her performance had left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed it. She was no longer merely the girl with the old Winchester. She was a master markswoman, disciplined, focused, and capable of triumphing under pressure. The day ended with applause that echoed across the range, a town witnessing the rise of an unexpected champion. Emily's story was no longer one of skepticism or mockery. It was a tale of perseverance, mastery, and quiet strength. She had shown that skill, discipline, and composure could overcome doubt and ridicule, and in doing so, she had begun to reshape the perceptions of everyone around her. The Montana sun hung low over the shooting range, bathing the field in warm amber light. The Frontier Rifle Challenge had drawn to its climax, and the air was thick with anticipation. Competitors and spectators alike had witnessed Emily Carter's extraordinary skill, and now the judges were ready to announce the final results. Emily stood at the firing line, her Winchester cradled with quiet reverence, a picture of calm composure amidst the murmurs of the crowd. She had performed flawlessly through every round, each shot a precise testament to her years of preparation, discipline, and the teachings of her late father. Jake Thompson, who had spent the day mocking and underestimating her, shifted uneasily. His previous confidence had given way to humility as he watched Emily's unshakable precision. His own performance, though impressive to others, had paled in comparison to her near-perfect streak. He glanced at her, unsure whether to approach or remain in his place, but he could no longer ignore the reality. She had earned the admiration of everyone present. The smirk that had once defined his arrogance was gone, replaced by a flicker of respect and awe. The announcer's voice rang out across the field, commanding attention. Ladies and gentlemen, the results of this year's Frontier Rifle Challenge are in. After an extraordinary display of marksmanship, skill, and precision, we are proud to declare this year's champion. A hush fell over the crowd. Emily's heart remained steady, her mind focused, even as a faint pulse of excitement rippled through her chest. She did not need recognition. Her proof was in her performance, but she understood the significance of this moment. Emily Carter. The announcer's voice boomed. Applause erupted immediately, a mixture of cheers, clapping, and awed exclamations. Spectators rose from their benches, some clapping loudly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Emily lowered her Winchester slightly and offered a modest nod, acknowledging the crowd with grace and humility. She did not raise her arms in triumph. She did not boast or revel in the attention. Instead, she allowed the results to speak for themselves, confident in the knowledge that her skill had been validated through action rather than words. Jake approached cautiously, his hands resting lightly on his hips. The crowd watched as he came to a stop beside Emily, his expression a mixture of humility and admiration. I didn't think anyone could do that, he admitted quietly, voice low enough that only she could hear. You're incredible. Emily met his gaze evenly, her calm demeanor unwavering. It's not about being incredible, she replied softly. It's about preparation, patience, and focus. Anyone willing to put in the work can achieve this. Her words carried no condescension, only a quiet confidence born from years of training and discipline. The crowd began to disperse slowly, though many lingered, still discussing the remarkable performance they had witnessed. Some approached Emily to shake her hand, asking questions about her training and techniques. Children looked up at her with wide-eyed admiration, inspired by her demonstration of focus and mastery. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as mockery and doubt had transformed into respect, awe, and recognition. Emily's performance had not only earned her victory, but had also challenged preconceived notions about skill, gender, and determination in a traditionally male-dominated arena. As she carefully cleaned her Winchester, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Each shot fired had been guided by years of patient practice under her father's watchful eye. She thought of the countless mornings and evenings spent in the backyard, the tin cans and paper targets, and the soft encouragement of her father as he taught her the fundamentals of marksmanship. Every lesson, every repetition, every small correction had culminated in this moment. Her victory was not just personal. It was a tribute to her father and the legacy he had instilled in her. Jake lingered nearby, observing her quiet composure. For the first time, he truly understood the depth of her discipline. "I guess I underestimated you," he admitted, voice tinged with regret. I thought it was just beginner's luck, but wow, you've earned this. Emily smiled faintly, appreciating his honesty. It's easy to underestimate someone, she said softly. But skill isn't about luck. It's about preparation, patience, and dedication. That's what matters. Jake nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson he had learned not just from her performance, but from her demeanor. The judges approached, offering congratulations and shaking her hand. Your precision was remarkable, one of them said. Not only did you hit every target, but you did so with calmness and control that most competitors could only dream of. Truly impressive. Emily accepted their words with quiet gratitude, allowing herself a brief sense of pride. She did not need to boast. The results were undeniable. Her performance had proven her capability beyond question, and her humility made her triumph even more inspiring. As the day drew to a close, Emily walked across the range, the sun dipping below the Montana horizon. The warm light illuminated her path as spectators began to pack up and leave, some pausing to give her one last nod of respect. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had not only proven herself, but had done so in a way that honored her father's teachings. Victory, she realized, was not measured solely by points or applause, but by the mastery of oneself and the integrity with which one approaches challenges. Even Jake, now a friend rather than an antagonist, walked beside her. You've changed my perspective today, he admitted, a hint of awe in his voice. I've been too focused on competition, on showing off, and I forgot what this is really about. Emily listened patiently, appreciating the sincerity of his words. Marksmanship, like life, she said softly, isn't about proving others wrong. It's about mastering yourself, being patient, and staying focused when it counts. That evening, Emily returned to her small cabin, the Winchester carefully stored in its case. She reflected on the day's events, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The challenge had been won, respect had been earned, and a lesson had been shared not just with the audience, but with Jake, the skeptics, and anyone who had doubted her abilities. She had proven that preparation and discipline could overcome mockery and doubt, and that true mastery required more than raw talent. It required patience, focus, and a deep respect for the tools and teachings that shaped one's skill. As she sat by the window, watching the last rays of sunlight fade behind the Montana mountains, Emily whispered a quiet tribute to her father. "We did it, Dad," she said softly. "Every lesson, every hour of practice, it all led to this. I hope I've made you proud." She felt a serene peace settle over her, a sense of completion, not born of applause, but of accomplishment. In that moment, she realized that true victory was as much about humility and respect as it was about skill. The town would remember the day Emily Carter dominated the Frontier Rifle Challenge, not merely for the scores she achieved, but for the grace, focus, and quiet power she had displayed. Her victory was a statement, a demonstration that dedication, patience, and mastery could silence doubt and command respect. She had entered as an outsider, underestimated and mocked, and she left as a symbol of perseverance, precision, and humble triumph. The days following the Frontier Rifle Challenge were unlike any Emily Carter had experienced. The town, still buzzing from her flawless performance, seemed to view her in a completely new light. Where skepticism had once reigned, now there was admiration. Conversations in the local diner, at the general store, and along the streets all circled back to her skill, her composure, and the quiet power she had displayed. Emily had entered as an outsider, a newcomer with a rifle and determination, and now she was a symbol of mastery and respect in a community that had once doubted her. Emily herself moved with the same quiet humility she had always maintained. She did not seek attention or boast of her accomplishments, but she could not ignore the way people now approached her with deference. Children looked at her with wide-eyed curiosity, asking about her rifle, her techniques, and the lessons she had learned from her father. Adults nodded respectfully, offering congratulations and seeking advice on marksmanship, discipline, and focus. The once dismissive murmurs of doubt had transformed into genuine admiration, a shift that Emily observed with quiet satisfaction. Jake Thompson, too, had changed. Once her primary critic, he now stood beside her more as an ally than a rival. He had approached Emily in the days after the challenge, offering a sincere apology for his mockery and acknowledging her skill. "I've been arrogant," he admitted. "I thought skill was about muscle, speed, and showing off. You've shown me it's about patience, focus, and respect for the craft. I have a lot to learn." Emily smiled faintly, appreciating his honesty. "It's never too late to learn," she said softly. "And it's never about proving others wrong, it's about improving yourself." The local shooting range became a gathering place for those inspired by Emily's performance. Young shooters, both men and women, came to observe her practice, hoping to glean insight from her precision and calm demeanor. Emily welcomed them, offering guidance and encouragement. She demonstrated proper stance, careful alignment, and steady breathing, emphasizing the importance of patience and repetition over recklessness and speed. Her approach was methodical, and her presence commanding not through words, but through her mastery and quiet confidence. Emily's influence began to shift the culture of the range. Where once there had been casual boasting and displays of bravado, now there was focus, respect, and genuine curiosity. People began to ask questions, listen carefully, and value learning over showing off. Jake, who had long been the dominant figure at the range, found himself learning from Emily's approach. He observed how she maintained her calm under scrutiny, how she measured every movement, and how her respect for the rifle and the craft inspired others. Slowly, he began to adjust his own behavior, trading arrogance for humility. Emily also used her platform to mentor younger competitors. She organized small sessions to teach proper handling, aim, and safety, always stressing the importance of patience, control, and respect for the tools and the environment. The children and teenagers who came to watch were captivated, not just by her skill, but by her approach to mastery. They learned that marksmanship was not about competition or ego, but about focus, dedication, and the quiet satisfaction of improving oneself. Her influence extended beyond the range, shaping attitudes about discipline and perseverance. The local press began to take notice as well. Articles appeared praising Emily's performance, highlighting her humility, composure, and precision. Headlines described her as Montana's sharpshooting sensation and the woman who redefined the frontier challenge. Interviews focused not on her gender or novelty, but on her mastery, her preparation, and the principles that guided her performance. Emily answered with modesty, emphasizing the years of practice, the lessons from her father, and the importance of patience, focus, and respect for one's craft. Her message resonated far beyond the range, inspiring readers and aspiring marksmen alike. One afternoon, as Emily practiced at the range, Jake approached her again. "I've never met anyone who can remain so calm under pressure," he said, shaking his head. "It's like you're in a different world when you fire." Emily looked up, her expression serene. "It's not magic," she replied. "It's focus. Every shot is the same. Every movement is deliberate. You learn to control your mind, and the rest follows." Jake nodded thoughtfully, recognizing that her mastery was not innate, but earned through years of disciplined effort. The community itself began to shift. Women who had previously hesitated to participate in competitions now felt inspired to try. Young men, once overly confident, began to approach marksmanship with respect and patience. Emily's presence had transformed the atmosphere, replacing arrogance with humility, doubt with admiration, and casual entertainment with meaningful learning. She became more than a competitor. She became a mentor, a guide, and a symbol of what could be achieved through dedication and focus. Even the most skeptical townspeople began to approach her with curiosity rather than doubt. They asked about her techniques, her practice routines, and her father's teachings. Emily shared willingly, always emphasizing discipline, respect, and preparation. She demonstrated how steady hands, careful breathing, and patient observation were more powerful than quick reflexes or bravado. Her quiet authority inspired those around her, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond the shooting range. As autumn settled over Montana, Emily reflected on the changes she had witnessed. The range had become a place of learning, respect, and collaboration. She had inspired others not through arrogance or spectacle, but through discipline, focus, and the example of a life lived with purpose. Jake had become a partner in this transformation, learning from her approach and modeling humility and patience. Together, they fostered an environment where skill was cultivated, respect was earned, and mastery was celebrated. Even more importantly, Emily's victory had reshaped perceptions about what was possible. She had shown that skill was not limited by gender, age, or previous experience. Anyone willing to dedicate themselves to discipline, patience, and focus could achieve excellence. Her father's teachings had guided her through mockery, doubt, and pressure, and now they were guiding a community toward respect, learning, and transformation. Emily's influence extended far beyond her own accomplishments, leaving an enduring legacy of precision, humility, and quiet power. By the time the first snow dusted the Montana pines, Emily was recognized not just as a champion marksman, but as a symbol of perseverance and respect. The lessons she shared continued to inspire young competitors, seasoned marksmen, and curious observers alike. Her victory, once personal, had become communal, a shared story of dedication, focus, and the power of preparation. Emily Carter had arrived as the unlikely newcomer, and through skill, patience, and humility, she had reshaped her world. As she walked across the quiet range one evening, her Winchester slung carefully over her shoulder, Emily felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had proven herself not for applause or recognition, but for the mastery of her craft, the legacy of her father, and the inspiration she could offer to others. The town had changed, the range had changed, and even Jake had changed. And all of it had begun with a single day of courage, focus, and unwavering determination. Winter had begun to settle over Montana, blanketing the pine forests and the rolling hills in a thin layer of snow. The shooting range, now quiet for the season, seemed almost serene, the echoes of summer competitions lingering only in memory. Emily Carter walked slowly along the familiar path to her cabin, her Winchester slung lightly over her shoulder. Though the competitions had ended for the season, her influence remained, a quiet but profound presence in the community. What had started as a day of skepticism and mockery had blossomed into a story of skill, resilience, and lasting legacy. As she approached her cabin, Emily paused to take in the familiar landscape. The mountains stood tall in the distance, their peaks capped with snow, and the valley below lay still in the early evening light. She thought back to the first day she had carried her Winchester to the range, the jeers and laughter still ringing in her ears. At that time, she had been determined but nervous, aware that many doubted her abilities. Now, months later, those doubts had transformed into admiration, respect, and inspiration. Emily had not only proven her skill, but had reshaped perceptions, her journey leaving a permanent mark on her community. The cabin was warm as she entered, a cozy refuge from the cold. She placed the Winchester carefully on the rack, cleaning it with meticulous care, as she had always done. Every scratch, every groove, every detail of the rifle reminded her of her father, Robert Carter, and the countless lessons he had imparted. He had taught her discipline, patience, and respect, not just for firearms, but for life itself. Emily reflected on how his teachings had guided her through mockery, pressure, and the intense scrutiny of competition. She realized that her victories were not merely technical, they were emotional and moral triumphs as well, honoring the values he had instilled. Emily's thoughts wandered to Jake Thompson, whose journey had also shifted alongside hers. Once her primary critic, he had grown to respect her skill, patience, and focus. Over time, he had become a partner in her efforts to cultivate a more respectful, disciplined shooting culture. They had spent hours together at the range, sharing insights, coaching younger participants, and learning from one another. Emily's humility and composure had influenced him as profoundly as her performance had influenced the crowd. She had not only won competitions, but had inspired growth in those around her, reshaping attitudes and expectations. The community's transformation was evident in countless small ways. Women who had once hesitated to participate in shooting competitions now approached Emily for guidance. Young competitors, both boys and girls, sought her mentorship, eager to learn the techniques, focus, and patience that had defined her flawless performance. The older marksman, once dismissive, now listened carefully, recognizing the importance of discipline over arrogance. Emily's impact extended beyond the scores on targets. She had fostered a culture of respect, learning, and perseverance that would endure long after her competitions had ended. One crisp morning, Emily organized a small training session for local youths at the range. She watched as a young girl aimed at a target for the first time, her hands trembling slightly. Emily approached quietly, kneeling beside her. "Breathe slowly," she instructed softly. "Focus on the target, not on the noise or the pressure. Your shot is about control, not speed." The girl exhaled, steadied her hands, and fired. The bullet struck near the center. A spark of excitement lit her eyes, and Emily smiled quietly, proud not for herself, but for the realization that her guidance had enabled someone else to find confidence and focus. Emily's reputation continued to grow beyond the town. Local newspapers recounted her journey, emphasizing not only her skill, but the grace and humility with which she had achieved it. Articles highlighted her mentorship, the transformation of the range's culture, and the inspiration she provided to aspiring marksmen of all ages. Parents brought their children to learn from her. Teachers invited her to speak about discipline and focus, and competitors sought her advice, eager to understand the principles that had led to her flawless performance. She had become a symbol of perseverance, patience, and mastery, embodying lessons far deeper than the shooting range alone. Amid all the recognition, Emily remained grounded. She continued to attribute her success to her father's teachings, to years of patient practice, and to the lessons learned through setbacks and challenges. "It's not about being better than anyone else," she would say to those who asked. "It's about mastering yourself, respecting the craft, and giving your best effort every time. That's what matters." Her words resonated with all who heard them, conveying wisdom earned through experience rather than simply triumphing in competition. Even in moments of reflection, Emily felt the presence of her father guiding her. She recalled his voice, the patience with which he had corrected her stance, adjusted her grip, and taught her to breathe with control. His lessons had become part of her being, shaping not only her marksmanship, but her character. Every shot she fired, every session she conducted with young learners, every lesson she shared with the community was a continuation of his influence, a living legacy carried forward through action, discipline, and humility. Winter deepened, blanketing the range and the surrounding hills in pristine white. Emily walked along the trails she had once explored with her father, her Winchester safely stored at home. She reflected on the journey from the day she had first faced ridicule to the present moment, where her skill and composure had inspired an entire community. She realized that her story was no longer just about her. It was about the people she had touched, the respect she had earned, and the culture she had helped transform. Her legacy was not just in the scores she achieved, but in the inspiration, mentorship, and quiet empowerment she had provided to others. One afternoon, Jake joined her for a walk along the snowy range. He carried his own rifle, but the air between them was no longer competitive in the old sense. It was filled with camaraderie, respect, and shared purpose. "You've changed everything here," he said quietly. "Not just the competitions, but how people approach marksmanship, and even how they treat one another." Emily smiled faintly, the snowflakes catching in her hair. "It's not about me," she replied softly. "It's about patience, practice, and respect. Anyone can carry that forward. I'm just glad to help others see it." The town began planning the next year's challenge, inspired by Emily's presence and influence. Competitions were expected to be larger, more inclusive, and more focused on skill and mentorship than spectacle. Parents encouraged their children to participate, and veterans of the sport sought to refine their technique under her guidance. Emily's vision of a respectful, disciplined community of shooters had taken root. What had started as a personal journey of proving herself had blossomed into a collective movement, one rooted in integrity, focus, and shared growth. As the first stars appeared in the Montana sky, Emily gazed at the snowy peaks in the distance. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her father's legacy had not only guided her to success, but had also become a guiding light for the next generation. Her journey from ridicule to triumph, from outsider to respected mentor, had left an indelible mark on her community and on the hearts of those who had witnessed her calm precision and unwavering dedication. She understood finally that true victory was measured not by accolades alone, but by the lasting influence one leaves on the lives of others. Emily whispered softly into the night, her voice carried by the wind over the quiet hills. "We did it, Dad," she said. "Your lessons, your patience, your guidance, they've shaped not just me, but everyone I've touched. I hope you're proud." A gentle hush settled over the valley, and in that serene moment, Emily felt a profound connection, a continuation of her father's influence. Alive in her actions, her guidance, and the respect she had earned. Her legacy, she realized, would endure long after the competitions ended and the targets were taken down. And with that understanding, Emily turned toward home, the snow crunching softly beneath her boots, carrying with her the quiet confidence of one who has mastered both skill and self. She had proven her worth, earned respect, inspired change, and honored her father's memory. The story of Emily Carter, the girl who had once been mocked, doubted, and underestimated, would resonate for years to come. A testament to perseverance, humility, and the enduring power of focus, patience, and quiet strength.